The kingdom of Eldoria was known for its lush landscapes, towering castles, and a princess whose beauty and grace were unrivaled. Princess Eve, the beloved daughter of King Eldrin and Queen Liza, had captivated hearts far and wide. Many suitors had sought her hand, but it was Prince James of Avaleth who won her favor. Their engagement was announced with great celebration, a union that promised to unite two powerful kingdoms. On the night of the grand engagement feast, the palace shone with golden light, and the halls echoed with music and laughter. Eve stood radiant in a gown of shimmering blue, her blonde hair cascading like a golden waterfall. As she exchanged a smile with James, the clock struck midnight. Suddenly, a chilling wind swept through the room. Gasps of horror filled the air as Eve clutched her stomach and fell to the floor. Before their eyes, her legs melded into a single serpentine tail. Her arms were covered in glistening scales, and her once hazel eyes turned into golden slits. The princess had transformed into a half-snake. She screamed in fear. Panic erupted in the hall. Prince James stumbled back, his face pale with terror. "James, help me please," the princess gasped, still in shock. James, horrified, shook his head, and fled. One by one, the suitors and guests fled, leaving Eve trembling in shame and fear. The queen rushed to her daughter's side, while the king, his heart heavy, ordered the guards to clear the room. The next morning, Eve awoke in her chamber, her human form restored. But the relief was short-lived. That night, at precisely midnight, the curse returned. By dawn, she was herself again, though patches of her skin now bore the faint pattern of scales. Far away in a shadowy grove, Abigail, the witch, watched the chaos unfold in her crystal orb. A bitter smile curled her lips. Decades ago, she had been a young woman deeply in love with King Eldrin. But he had chosen Liza, a woman of noble birth, over her. The rejection had festered into hatred, and she vowed to make him suffer. Eve was the key to her vengeance. Abigail's spell was no mere punishment, it was a slow unraveling. Each night, Eve's curse extended, creeping closer to the daylight hours. By the time the transformation was complete, Eve would be a snake forever. The royal family sought help from far and wide. Magicians, alchemists, and healers flooded into Eldoria, promising cures. Potions were brewed, incantations chanted, and ancient texts consulted. But the curse resisted every attempt. Meanwhile, Eve became increasingly isolated. Her once vibrant skin now bore the scales of her affliction even during the day, spreading from her arms to her neck and her face. She no longer attended court and spent her days wandering the palace gardens, a shadow of her former self. The king, desperate to save his daughter, issued a proclamation: a reward of gold, land, and a noble title shall be granted to anyone who breaks the curse on Princess Eve. Hopeful adventurers and scholars descended upon Eldoria, but none succeeded. Eve's condition worsened, and with each passing day, she felt more like the monster she feared she would become. One evening, unable to bear the suffocating walls of the palace, Eve ventured into the forest of elms. The woods, dense with ancient trees and the melodies of birds, provided her solace. As she sat by a brook, a distant sound of hoofbeats caught her attention. A young man emerged from the trees, astride a dark horse. He wore a leather tunic and carried a satchel slung over his shoulder. His dark curls framed a face both rugged and kind. "Good evening, my lady," he greeted, dismounting. "Forgive me for intruding, but I seem to have lost my way." Eve hesitated, then nodded. "You are in the forest of elms, stranger. What brings you here?" "I'm Humphrey," he said with a bow. "A merchant from Betrayal. I seek a rare flower for my perfumes." Eve studied him. Unlike others, he did not recoil at her scaled arms or the slit in her eyes. They spoke for hours, sharing stories and laughter. For the first time in months, Eve felt like herself. Humphrey returned the next day, and the day after that. Their friendship deepened, and Eve found herself confiding in him about her curse. Humphrey listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought. "I may not be a magician," Humphrey said one day, but I believe some curses are rooted in pain. To undo this, we must confront the one who cast it. Eve told him about Abigail and how one of the alchemists had mentioned that she was responsible for her condition. But explained to him that all efforts to find Abigail by the palace guards proved abortive. We'll find her this time. You know these witches, they can evade any search. But I think if you go with me, we'll be able to track her down, Humphrey explained. Eve was hesitant. Facing Abigail was dangerous, but Humphrey's resolve gave her courage. Together, they prepared for the journey, gathering supplies and studying maps. The king, though reluctant to let his daughter venture into danger, saw the determination in her eyes and gave his blessing. The pair set out at dawn, following whispers and clues about Abigail's lair. After days of travel, they reached the Shadow Grove, a desolate place shrouded in mist. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the trees twisted like claws. Inside a crumbling hut, Abigail awaited them. Her hair was wild, her eyes burning with malice. "So," she sneered, "the cursed princess comes to beg." "I'm here to end this," Eve said, her voice steady. "What do you want from me?" Abigail laughed coldly. "It's not about you, girl. Your father's betrayal is the reason for your suffering. But you cannot vent your anger on me. I had no part in whatever that happened between you in the past, and you should let go your bitterness and grudges," Eve told her firmly. Abigail burst into a terrible laugh. "Look who is talking. You have no right to inflict Eve with this terrible affliction," Humphrey told her coldly. "Where is your humanity?" Abigail was incensed. Her eyes sparked fire. "Humanity? Did you say humanity? Ask Eldrin, ask Eldrin." She screamed, her neck nerves almost bursting. "Punish me, then," a voice boomed. King Eldrin stepped from the shadows, having secretly followed his daughter. "Spare my child." Abigail faltered, her eyes softening for a moment. "You don't deserve mercy." Humphrey stepped forward. "Abigail, you loved once. That love still lives in your heart. Let it guide you now." His words struck a chord. Abigail's expression wavered, and a single tear slipped down her cheek. She raised her staff, and for a moment, Eve feared the worst. But instead of a curse, a golden light enveloped the room. The scales on Eve's skin faded, her serpentine features dissolving into human form. When the light dimmed, she was whole again. The curse broken, Abigail vanished into the forest, leaving behind only the faint scent of jasmine. Eve embraced her father, tears streaming down her face. Then she turns to Humphrey, her gratitude and affection shining in her eyes. They hugged and held each other tightly. They returned to Eldoria as heroes. The kingdom rejoiced, and the love between Eve and Humphrey blossomed. They married in a ceremony that rivaled even her engagement to James, uniting not just two hearts, but two kingdoms. In time, Eve forgave those who had abandoned her. Her experience taught her resilience, compassion, and the strength to rise above adversity. Eldoria flourished, and the tale of the cursed princess who found love and courage became a legend passed down for generations.